Get ready for one of Tal's greatest queen sacks and greatest attacking games. So he was playing black in this one way back in 1958, and his opponent with the white pieces was Milko Bobotsov. Let's see what happened here. After d4, Tal quickly goes in now for a King's Indian defense. Super dynamic, super aggressive. So white goes for the classic setup in the center, and after e4, d6, we now see white play pawn to f3, which is the start of the same-ish variation. Many ways for white to play, of course. Tal now castles, and after knight g to e2, he immediately strikes at the centre with pawn c5. Now, what are the white ideas here? Well, white's looking to attack on the king side, rip open the king, and black for their part is going on the queen side, so always an exciting game. Bishop e3 covers the centre, and now this knight develops and we see queen d2, preparing that queenside castles. And now interesting from Tal, after pawn to a6, preparing b5, castles, he doesn't go for an immediate b5, he puts his queen on a5. And in a way this is risky because there's a common tactic around this. When you've got an undefended queen on a5 and an undefended pawn on e7, then white can land this knight on d5, hit the queen here, and hit this pawn on e7 from d5. But if you do it straight away like I'm showing here, well then black can take with check, bishop recaptures, let's say, or rook takes, doesn't matter, and then you've got time to deal with this threat, either by taking or guarding the pawn, whatever. Okay, not guarding the pawn, then you run into a knight fork, but you're fine as black, right? But coming back here, after white goes king to b1, now the threat's in the air. But what does Tal do? He ignores it and plays pawn to b5. And this is so astute because after white lands this knight d5 move, this is the trick. He doesn't take the queen because then he's running into this Zwischenzug or intermezzo of check, king goes, then you pick up the queen, white's a pawn ahead. And if instead of taking that queen, you drop your queen back to cover the pawn, well now you're simply a lot of tempos down, white's a lot better. So what does Tal have planned? Well, this is where he sacks his queen. He takes the knight on d5 because after white captures here, he then picks up a bishop, so a second minor piece. That's 6 points of material for the 9-point queen, and he hits this rook. Now after the rook moves away, he then takes this pawn, that's now 7 points of material, so he's already starting to reduce the imbalance. And here's the really interesting moment as well. White now gives up the rook and the material balance is fully restored in terms of that points count. Now, white didn't have to do that. The computer's favourite move, but only just, is queen to e1. But I can understand why white didn't do this, because after captures on d4, knight f4 being the best move in response to open the bishop, prepare to bring the knight back and blockade, well then this knight can hit e3, and look what an absolute octopus that is, easily worth a rook in this position. So coming back here, I can understand why queen e1 not played, instead the rook eliminated the knight, pawn recaptures, and then we see this knight now remaneuver, open the bishop. Now white does it in a bit of a passive way with knight c1. Better was knight f4, bit more dynamic. But okay, knight c1 on the board, possibly with some kind of defensive ideas in mind, or hitting d3 once this pawn's eliminated. And now Tal carries on in his usual dynamic way. So he could take this pawn on d4, it's a good move. But he instead goes rook to b8, saying, okay, you can't take my pawn, or else then I'm crashing through here, and this is actually leading to checkmate in 2 moves. So no taking the pawn on c5. Instead, white takes the pawn on c4. And now knight b6 spins around, hits that undefended piece, it retreats to b3, and now this pawn is captured on d4. And now black's got this threat in the air to go pawn c4 and then run it through even to c3. So white goes queen d2 to play against that. And it looks such a natural move, but it swings the eval bar from -1.5 to -6.5. So what does the computer want here as the best move? Well, it's knight to e2, but this is not an obvious move to play because it runs into a tactic which I'm sure both players saw. Can you find the best way for black to continue here? So the move black can play, is bishop takes on b2. And after the king recaptures, which is not best by the way, then there's knight c4 check, picking up the queen using the pinned bishop. But what white should do here, what the computer wants to do, modern day engine, is then move the king to c2 so it comes off the b file. After this bishop retreats, we'll then bring a rook, challenge the file. If pawn c4, bishop a4, white remains worse, but it's not so much. Now, coming back here, knight e2 not played. Instead, queen d2 played. Now there's no c4, or you drop the bishop here. Very logical. But after Tal retreats, now knight e2, this is the problem. c4, the bishop goes, and c3. And the whole sequence is inevitable, plus picking up a tempo on the queen once you put it on that square. This is the problem. Now, you want to take knight takes, but then there's knight c4. Again, picking up that tempo on the queen and hitting this pawn with the rook, and the bishop hits here. What to do? If queen e1 to stay with the knight, so the bishop can't take using the pin, well then there's rook takes with check, and if the king comes here, you lose a whole bishop, plus this is dropping. If the king comes here, well now you can check from this diagonal. Really nice switch of the dark squared bishop. King goes and knight e3 check, and you either give up your queen or you're about to lose this bishop on the next move. It's just a hopeless game over. So coming back here, no knight takes on c3. Instead, the queen nudged up to d3. Tal wins this pawn, and after knight d4, logical, trying to close out this bishop, just a very calm continuation now of bishop to d7, bringing more pieces into the game, because you threaten knight a4 or bishop a4, and you can now bring this rook over. So rook d1 was played, this rook hit the c file, bishop b3 and knight a4, and there's a big check threatened to be landed there, so the bishop really has to eliminate. This one recaptures, hits this rook, so the knight blocks the attack, and now rook c3 carries on the invasion, and white is not long for this world. They pick up this pawn, hit the bishop, so it takes off this knight. Pawn recaptures. How many of us would instantly take here? Well, it's not the best move. If you pause a moment, you'll then be able to see that doubling the rooks is the strongest way to play, as Tal did. Because the pawn is immune from the king, you simply drop back a rook, you win the queen due to this discovered check. No good. And because the pawn can't be captured, what do? Top computer moves are giving up the queen or king a2, but it's all hopeless. In the game, we see queen to a3, but now after check, rook captures, this rook recaptures. Okay, the king is just boxed in. Choose how you want to checkmate. You can go rook a1 check. Tal goes for this one, really nice, using the two bishops and these pieces hemming in the white king. I hope you enjoyed this one. See another amazing game. Check out the video on screen and do subscribe to never miss a future video. Thanks very much for watching and see you soon.